I try not to follow what's going on in the political scene because it's already easy enough to be angry, and there are already enough angry people in the world, and there are already enough reasons to be angry without consciously stoking one's anger. It's not good for one's mental health. It's not good for the mental health of those around one, and so it's generally something that I avoid. But certain things do filter down to me, and I find out about what's going on in this way or that way. And so I found out that Biden had appointed this guy named David Chipman, who it turns out was one of the butchers of Waco, one of the participants in that very black spot, one of many black spots in U.S. law enforcement's history, in the history of the governmental terrorism towards civilians, whether it be domestic or foreign. In this case, domestic. A siege that was completely unnecessary and wound up killing, I think it was in the hundreds. Forgive me for not knowing the exact death toll of those innocents who died during that siege at Waco. But this all jogged a certain memory for me, and that's what I want to talk about here. I don't want to just stew in the fact that this particular person was appointed to this particular post. That his history, his murderous history, didn't disqualify him. I mean, unfortunately, he's one of many examples, maybe one of the more egregious ones, considering that Waco was one of the more egregious instances of this kind of behavior on the part of state actors. Nevertheless, not that unusual in certain ways. But here's the memory that got jogged in my mind, and what I wanted to share with y'all. And this is something that maybe there's video evidence of somewhere. I swear to you that I remember this happening. And it would hardly be believed by today's standards, by the template with which we examine things, with which we expect things to shape up as far as media goes. There was a time, and it wasn't that long ago, leading into even the early 90s, all the way up to the Waco incident in 93, there was a time where being on the right, being conservative, meant that you were pretty much pro-law enforcement, that you were pretty much knee-jerk in favor of any kind of action taken by law enforcement, regardless of the lack of prudence or regardless of the brutality involved. I remember in the 80s, the war on drugs, when that reached a fever pitch. Of course, at the same time, you had government agencies like the CIA selling drugs, but that's a whole different subject. But with the face that they focused upon the world, as opposed to the second face that they turned away from the world, in the left-hand path, if you will, in which they practice such dark deeds, of which drug dealing, is only a minor infraction. But the regular government, as opposed to the shadow government, was raiding homes and confiscating contraband and sending people to prison for years and years, just for possession of a illegal narcotic, or whether it be marijuana or cocaine or whatever. And there was on the right at the time in the 80s, there was really no questioning of this. It was just, it's good. We've got to get tough on drugs, and we've got to take these people down. And the SWAT people, the SWAT teams are the good guys, the people who are geared up in body armor, raiding people's homes. These are the good guys. These are the ones we should be cheering for. This notion, this mentality persisted on much of the right, I should say the mainstream right. It might be that the radical right had a different perspective on things even back then, because you had, I think it was in the early 90s, prior to Waco, there was the incident at Ruby Ridge, which was Waco on a smaller scale, with Randy Weaver and his family, and the atrocities perpetrated against them. And you had so I would say, again, the more fringy types, and I don't use the term fringy in a negative way, I'm just trying to be descriptive. The more fringy types would be questioning of, or even hostile towards, these federal law enforcement agencies. But I remember, even into the 90s, after Waco took place, after the siege on Waco happened and the numerous state-sponsored murders happened at Waco, I remember that even the recently deceased Rush Limbaugh was pro-federal law enforcement. And I remember that this was around the time that he had his TV show. He had a short-lived TV show for a time, I guess, for maybe a couple of years in the early 90s, including 93. And there was a time where, after Waco, prominent Democrat John Conyers was berating Janet Reno, the Attorney General at the time, was berating her for the way that the siege on Waco was handled. So you had a liberal Democrat raking Janet Reno, who was appointed by Bill Clinton, raking her over the coals for what took place at Waco. And Janet Reno responded with defiance. I don't remember exactly what she said, but she just said something like, we did what we had to do, and I would do it again, and just not showing any remorse for what took place. And I remember that Rush Limbaugh said something like, "Get this woman a medal," and his studio audience all applauded. It's so hard to picture, it's so hard to believe right now that took place, but I remember this. I remember seeing it on TV, in my little tiny TV in my that I owned at the time, in my little apartment that I had, where I had barely any furniture. I just had a mattress on the floor. It was kind of somebody joked that it looked like a meth lab kind of place. I just don't believe in having a bunch of stuff. So I was a single guy, bachelor, just out of college, living alone at the time. I remember watching this on TV and taking note of it and saying to myself, wow, Rush Limbaugh is coming to the defense of Janet Reno, who was the appointee of Bill Clinton, after she was being attacked by John Conyers, who was a Democrat. And so somewhere along the way, it became hip and cool on the right to be critical of law enforcement, but particularly federal law enforcement. And it became less of a fringy thing, fringy in quotation marks. Like a couple years later, it seemed like there were people saying, "Oh, Clinton's response to the Branch Davidians at Waco was just so out of line, and it shows that the federal government is out of control," and so forth, and that became a very mainstream thing. But when it happened, It was not a mainstream thing. And I wish I could find this footage. If I find, well, I'll try to find it. Actually, I think it'll be hard to find. But if anybody else remembers this incident, please chime in and let me know, because for me, this just shows that you've got to not go by what your heroes in the media are saying, or what you think the people you think represent you, what they're saying, because they turn on a dime. And I don't mean to speak ill of the dead, but Rush himself just turned on a dime when it became convenient to do so, I think, in this case. But back in '93, when it was still rah law enforcement, if you were a right winger, then that was the kind of rhetoric he was spouting, even to the point of coming white knighting for Janet Reno, of all people. If you've got a white knight for a woman, Janet Reno of all women. Anyway, let me know if any of y'all remember this, and let me know what you think. My name's Andy Nowicki. You can check out my work at altrightnovelist.com.